The homestead leaned against the wind like an old drunk, boards warped and paint long gone. The sun bled red along the horizon, throwing long shadows across the yard. Dust clung to boots, to skirts, to every breath drawn by the crowd that had gathered. They came not for mercy, but for spectacle. Clara stood at the porch rail, her fingers clutching the broken silver locket at her throat. The chain bit into her skin, half-mended wire holding it together, but it was all she had left of her mother. She touched it now as if it might shield her, though nothing could. Her father cleared his throat, loud, false, full of whiskey. "A cow for a bride," he said. His voice carried sharp and flat over the yard. Laughter answered him, thin, ugly laughter from men who liked the smell of trade when it was cruel. The rancher stepped forward. His name was Harlan Pike, though most called him Old Pike. His beard was yellowed, his hands gnarled, his breath sour with rot. He was 60 if a day, but his grip on Clara's wrist was iron. He hauled her from the porch and turned her like stock at market. "She'll do," he said. Strong enough hips for breeding, Clara's cheeks burned. She stared at the dirt, wishing it would open and swallow her whole. Every whisper stung, barren, cursed, sold cheap. She heard them all. The women folded arms, lips pinched in judgment. The men just watched. No one moved to stop it. Her father took the rope from Pike's hands and tied it to the cow waiting in the pen. The animal bawled once, confused, then settled. The bargain was struck, the world tilted. Clara tried to pull back, but Pike yanked her forward, fingers digging into her arm. His nails tore skin. "You'll mind me," he said. "Obedience. Children. That's the order of things." Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Pride was the only weapon left. She pressed her lips tight and lifted her chin, though her heart raced like a trapped bird. The locket swung against her chest, a small glimmer in the failing light. Night fell hard and sudden. The crowd thinned, drifting back to their shacks and tents, but not before they'd feasted on the sight of her humiliation. Clara's father counted the cow as if salvation were written in its hide. When the last lantern was doused, Pike dragged her toward his wagon. The boards creaked under her boots as he shoved her inside. The smell of old hay and rust filled her nose. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called. She thought of running, but where? The desert stretched endless, and the rancher's men waited. Her breath came quick, shallow. The wagon lurched forward. The night air grew colder, slicing against her skin. Pike leaned close, his whisper foul. "Tomorrow you'll be my wife. Tonight you'll learn obedience." Clara clenched her fists. She wanted to scream, to fight, but fear strangled her voice. The locket pressed into her palm, edges sharp. Then came the sound. A crack split the silence, gunfire close. The wagon halted. Horses snorted, rearing. Men shouted. Another shot rang out. Sparks lit the dark, brief and fierce. Clara stumbled to the edge of the wagon, her eyes wide. Through the smoke and confusion, a figure stepped from the shadows. A man tall, shoulders broad beneath a battered duster. His hat brim shadowed his eyes, but the rifle in his hands gleamed cold under moonlight. "Let her go," he said. His voice was low, flat, deadly. Pike's men froze. Pike himself hissed, dragging Clara closer. "She's mine." "Paid for her fare." The man leveled the rifle, unblinking. His scarred jaw caught the light. His eyes were like flint. "She's not yours." The crowd gasped, those few still lingering. The air tightened, thick as rope pulled taut. The desert wind carried every breath, every heartbeat. Clara felt her pulse pound in her ears. She clutched the locket, its chain biting her skin, as if her mother's ghost might be listening. The standoff held, firelight flickering across sweat and steel. No one moved, not yet, but the moment quivered on the edge of violence. Waiting for the first spark to set it all ablaze, Pike lunged, spittle on his beard, dragging Clara like a calf to branding. The rifle cracked. Dust exploded at Pike's boots. He stumbled back, cursing. The mysterious rider didn't fire to kill yet. He stood firm, shoulders squared, smoke curling from the barrel. "Back," the man said. His tone cut sharper than steel. For a breath, no one moved. Then Pike's men surged forward. The rider swung his rifle wide, grabbed Clara's arm and yanked her close. She smelled leather, sweat, gunpowder. His grip was steady, unyielding. "Up," he said. Before she could think, she was lifted, tossed onto the back of his waiting horse. The animal stamped, muscles taut, nostrils flaring. Bullets cracked through the night. Clara ducked, gasping. Sparks flew from the wagon's frame. Someone shouted her name, but she didn't look back. The stranger vaulted into the saddle, one motion smooth as water. His arm caged her in. Then the horse leapt forward. The world became hooves and fire. Dirt sprayed. Shots whistled past, thudding into the dark. Men gave chase, their curses swallowed by wind. Clara clung to the saddle horn, her knuckles white. The rider leaned low, urging the beast faster. He fired one-handed, precise, every shot forcing men back. The land blurred, sagebrush, split rail fences, open prairie. Moonlight spilled silver across the chaos. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, terror and awe mingling until she couldn't tell one from the other. The chase raged for miles. A bullet grazed the horse's flank. The animal screamed, but the rider drove him harder, guiding them into a dry riverbed. Sand kicked high, hiding their trail. At last, silence began to swallow the night. No hoofbeats behind, no shouts, just their ragged breathing and the endless drum of the horse. They didn't stop. Not until dawn. The canyon rose around them, walls red and jagged, shadows long and cold. At the first bend, the rider pulled up, breath steaming in the chill. The horse quivered, foam on its flanks. Clara slid down, stumbling, legs too weak to hold. She collapsed onto stone, clutching her chest. He dismounted slower, deliberate, like a man who had spent years carrying the weight of danger. His face was hard cut, his jaw scarred deep as if from a blade. His eyes were gray steel, unreadable. Clara forced words past her dry throat. Why would you save me?" He didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he crouched near her, pulled the broken locket from where it dangled askew. The clasp had torn loose in the ride, leaving it half-hanging, chain bent. He studied it in silence. Then, with rough fingers, he twisted a scrap of wire from his belt and fixed the chain. A small act, careful. Clara's breath caught. No man had ever touched it except her mother. He placed it back against her collarbone, the silver warm from his palm. Still, his face gave nothing. Without a word, he turned and began gathering brushwood. Sparks soon flickered as flint met steel. The fire crackled to life, painting the canyon walls in gold and shadow. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. The memory of Pike's grip still burned her skin. Yet here was this man, silent and unyielding, who had pulled her from the jaws of shame, Tector, outlaw, or something darker. She watched him in the firelight, every move deliberate, every silence heavy. The locket gleamed faintly against her throat. She touched it once, unsettled, then looked back at the stranger. "Who are you?" she whispered. He didn't look up. The flames answered in his stead, sparks drifting into the gray dawn. The canyon held its breath, and Clara realized she might have leapt from one prison into another. The canyon narrowed into red cliffs that towered like walls. By dusk, Elias slowed his horse and pointed toward a half-collapsed shack clinging to the stone. Rusted tin roofing flapped in the wind. Broken windows stared out like blind eyes. "This'll do," he said. Clara slid down, her legs stiff from the ride. The earth smelled of iron and dust. The shack looked ready to fold at the next storm, but it offered more than open sky. Inside, cobwebs hung thick, boards gaped, and a stove crouched in the corner, rusted but whole. A few crates and a cot stood abandoned, ghosts of some miner's dream gone to ruin. Clara rubbed her arms against the cold. Her dress was torn from the escape, hem stained with blood and mud. "We'll freeze in here," she said. "Not if we work." Elias set about in silence. He stripped brushwood, split old boards for fuel. His movements were precise, economical, like a man who wasted nothing. Clara tried to mimic him, gathering twigs, but her soft hands blistered quickly. She hissed, dropping a branch. He glanced at her, expression unreadable, then handed her a pair of worn gloves. "Keep at it," so she did. Her arms ached, her shoulders burned, but she kept stacking wood until her palms stung through the leather. She had never labored so, not even in the fields her father made her tend. Shame turned to stubborn fire. She would not collapse, not before this man. By nightfall, smoke curled from the stovepipe. The beans Elias found in an old sack hissed and popped in the pan. Clara stirred them, awkward, spilling half. Her cheeks burned, but he only said, "Good enough." They ate in silence. The beans were gritty, bitter, but warmth filled her belly. The canyon wind howled through the cracks, carrying sand across the floor. Firelight flickered against Elias's face, carving deep lines around his scar. Clara studied him in secret. The revolver laid beside him, the way he always faced the door, shoulders tense even at rest. Sleep wouldn't come. She lay on the cot, blanket scratchy, watching him sit upright against the wall, rifle across his lap. His eyes never fully closed. By morning, she tried hauling water from a stream down the canyon. The bucket felt heavier with each step back up the slope. She slipped, knees scraping stone. Elias appeared, steadying the pail with one hand, but said nothing. Her pride burned hotter than the wound. She forced herself to finish, chin high, blood running down her shin. He didn't mock. He only watched, silent as the cliffs. On the third day, Clara managed firewood without dropping it. She cooked beans without spilling. She carried water without stumbling. Her body ached, but grit grew where weakness had lived. Elias gave no praise, yet his silence carried a strange weight. Acknowledgement unspoken. One evening, as the sun bled against the cliffs, she finally asked, "Why did you save me?" He looked up from the fire. His eyes flashed with something hard, dangerous, but not cruel. Because no woman should be sold for cattle. The words struck her deeper than she expected. For a moment, warmth stirred beneath her fear. Something fragile, something alive. But the moment didn't last. From far beyond the canyon walls, faint and chilling, came the howl of dogs. One voice at first, then another joining, distant but sure. Elias's hand went to the revolver. His jaw tightened. "They're not done," he said. The fire popped. The wind carried the sound away, but the dread remained. Clara clutched her locket, the metal cold against her skin. Somewhere in the darkness, the hunt had begun again. The mornings came colder now, frost whispering along the canyon rim. Clara rose stiff, fingers raw from work, and set about gathering wood before Elias stirred. She wanted to prove she could manage without his watchful silence. But the axe slipped. A shard of splinter drove deep across her palm. She gasped, dropping the branch, blood spilling bright against gray bark. Elias was beside her before she could hide it. His rough hands caught hers, holding steady. He said nothing at first, just studied the wound. "It's nothing," she muttered. But her voice trembled. "Hold still." He tore a strip from his own shirt, cleaned the cut with water from the canteen. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as though the smallest slip might break her. She noticed the faint tremor in his fingers, the way his jaw clenched not with anger, but with memory. When he tied the bandage snug, he didn't let go right away. His eyes met hers, shadowed by grief she couldn't name. Then he turned away, rising fast, as if afraid she had seen too much. That night, when the fire burned low, Clara woke to find Elias staring at her locket. It glinted faint in the firelight where it hung from a bent clasp. His thumb brushed the silver as though it held answers. "You shouldn't touch that," she whispered. He didn't startle. His eyes remained on the piece. "Yours?" "My mother's," Clara said. Her throat tightened. "She died when I was small. It broke years ago. I kept it anyway." She lifted it, showing the clasp, the chain held together by a single twist of wire. "It's all I have left of her." For the first time since she'd met him, Elias's expression shifted. Not hardness, but something softer, caught between sorrow and longing. He pulled a bit of wire from his kit, worked it carefully into the chain. His hands were steady now, precise. When he finished, he pressed the locket back into her palm. "Things worth keeping," he muttered. Clara felt a heat bloom in her chest, a warmth she hadn't known in months. Trust, fragile but growing, rooted in that small act. For days after, she watched him differently. She saw not only the scar and the revolver, but the way he shouldered burdens without complaint. He carried water twice as heavy as hers, kept the fire alive through freezing nights, gave her the better portion of food without comment. Yet his silence was its own cage. He never spoke of himself, never spoke of what lay behind those steel-gray eyes. And sometimes, when the wind rose and coyotes cried, Clara wondered if she had simply traded one prison for another. Pike's cruelty had been plain. Elias's walls were invisible, but no less real. One morning, while foraging among the rocks, Clara found herself wandering farther from camp than usual. She bent to gather sage, her fingers brushing against a scrap of paper half buried in dust. She tugged it free. Her breath caught. The ink was smudged, But the words were clear. Wanted. Elias Kane, deserter, murderer, dead or alive. The likeness was rough but true. The scar, the eyes, the grim line of his mouth. A bounty worth more than her family's entire farm. Clara froze. The world narrowed to the paper trembling in her hands. Murderer. The man who had lifted her from Pike's grasp. The man who had mended her locket with patient hands. Her chest tightened. She staggered back, eyes darting toward the canyon. He was there, a dark figure moving among the rocks, carrying the water pail. Did he see her? Did he know she held the truth? Clara shoved the paper into her skirts, heart thundering. She felt the chain of the locket press warm against her skin, a cruel reminder of trust half-formed. Who was Elias Kane? Protector, outlaw, both? Her breath came shallow as he drew closer, shadows stretching long in the canyon dusk. And for the first time since her rescue, fear returned, sharp and cold as the desert night. Clara folded the bounty poster in her hands. Edges creased, ink smudged. She held it out, trembling. This is you. Elias's gaze didn't waver. The firelight carved shadows across his scarred jaw, he said, flat, honest. Her pulse raced. You're wanted for murder. He sighed, running a hand through tangled hair. I deserted the army, refused orders. They wanted me to kill innocents, children, families. I did what I had to survive. That's all the blood on my hands. She stared, breath caught in her chest. The man who saved her, who mended her locket, who hauled water and split wood like a silent sentinel. He had darkness stitched into him, a past as jagged as the cliffs. Clara swallowed hard. She thought of Pike, of her father's greed, of the humiliation she'd endured. Her shame collided with his guilt, their pain echoing each other. You're like me, she whispered, voice low, forced to live by others' cruelty. Elias's eyes softened, but only for a heartbeat. Then Steele returned. And yet we keep going. For hours they worked in silence, stacking wood, tending the fire. Yet the quiet between them hummed with something heavier, something raw and undeniable. Clara noticed the way he moved near her, careful but protective, and how his glance lingered on the locket glinting against her collarbone. That night, the fire crackled low. Smoke curled into the rafters, carrying the scent of burned sage and wood. Clara sat close, knees drawn up. Her fingers brushed the chain, then hesitated. Slowly her hand reached out. His hand met hers. They brushed, then lingered. Pain and hope met in that tiny touch. The locket caught firelight between them, silver shining like a bridge between past and present. What if they come for you? She asked, voice trembling, eyes fixed on his. Then I stand, he said, simple, unflinching. The words wrapped around her chest. She realized trust could exist here, even in the canyon, even with danger pressing close, even with the shadow of murder trailing him. Their hands stayed together for a long minute. Clara felt strength she hadn't known she possessed, bolstered by his steady presence. The locket pressed between their palms, warm, weighty, a promise of something fragile but real. Outside, the canyon wind whispered, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and horses. Clara's ears pricked at the sound of distant movement, a low rumble, then another. Hooves pounding in rhythm, growing louder, her stomach clenched. She tore her gaze from the fire to the canyon entrance. Dust clouds stirred on the distant ridges. Riders, many of them, armed men, and she recognized the one leading, a figure she knew too well. Pike. Elias stood slowly, hands on his revolver, eyes narrowing. The calm he carried in the firelight was gone, replaced by the predator's tension, muscles coiled like spring wire. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Fear and adrenaline surged together, sharp and bitter. She glanced down at the locket, pressed it against her chest, and felt the pulse of trust and defiance mingling there. Elias's jaw tightened. They want her back, he muttered. No, she said, voice small but firm. Not if I can help it. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement, then crouched low beside her. The firelight painted them in gold and shadow, hand over hand, locket between them, hearts hammering. The riders crested the canyon rim. Dust swirled. Hooves clattered. Pike's laughter carried across the rocks. Mocking, cruel, determined. Clara squeezed Elias's hand. They were alone in the canyon, but together. Against the wind, the riders, and the past, trust had been forged, fragile but unbreakable. And in that moment, every glance, every scar, every silver glint of the locket carried a single truth. Survival would not be enough. They would have to fight. Together. The rumble of horses grew, echoing through the cliffs. A promise of danger, and a test of the fragile bond they had just begun to trust. Dawn broke pale over the canyon. A thin wash of gray light spilling into the shack. Clara stirred, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. She smelled smoke, dry wood, ash, and heard the creak of boards above. Something was wrong. The first shout shattered the morning. "She's here!"
"Grab her!"
The door splintered. Men poured through, rifles raised, hooves stamping outside as backup surged up the cliff path. Clara froze, heart hammering. Elias was already moving. He yanked her upright, eyes scanning every shadow. "Stay close," he whispered. The shack became a storm of dust, bullets, and splintering wood. Elias fired from the doorway, sweeping men aside, dragging Clara with him. She stumbled over rocks, scrambling after him as the world blurred in dust and fear. They crashed through the canyon, hooves thundering, shouts echoing against red walls. Clara clung to his back, skin burning, eyes stinging with grit. Every shot missed by inches. Every shout carved terror into her chest. Then they reached the river. The current was swollen from recent rains. Water churned gray and white. Elias skidded to the edge. Behind them, the men pressed, shouting, guns raised, and then she saw him, her brother, wide-eyed, rifle in hand, riding with Pike's men. Betrayal burned hotter than the gunfire. Her chest ached as she realized the truth. Her own blood had been sent to reclaim her, to trade her like cattle again. Clara's knees buckled. "Brother, why?" she whispered, voice cracking. Elias glanced at her, jaw tight. "We have no time." He grabbed her hand, yanking her into the river's current. Bullets sliced the water around them. The icy river bit through clothing, through skin, and yet they pressed forward. The current tossed them like rag dolls. Clara clutched the locket, twisted chains scraping against her fingers. Her brother fired once, twice. Then the rifle jammed or misfired. She didn't see clearly. But he rode on, faceless and distant, a phantom of shame and greed. Elias fought the river with a strength born of desperation. He pulled her along, shielding her with his body as the waves knocked them down, sand and pebbles grinding into their skin. Clara's teeth chattered, body trembling, but she clung to him, to the locket, to the small warmth left in a world gone cold. Hours felt like minutes. The river carried them downstream, twisting and roaring, tossing them through rocks and brush. Eventually, the current slackened, but the riverbank was jagged and uneven. They crawled onto mud and stone, soaked, bruised, and shaking. Clara collapsed, gasping, chest heaving, tears mingling with river water on her face. She pressed her palm to the locket at her throat. "You're all I have now," she whispered, voice fragile and raw. Elias sat beside her, shirt clinging to his chest, hair plastered with mud. He reached over, brushing water from her cheek, eyes dark, steady. "And you're more than they deserve," he said. She sobbed quietly, letting grief pour for the family who had abandoned her, for the shame that had stalked her, for the cruel bargain her father had struck. She sobbed for the life she'd thought lost, and yet here in the river's edge, survival felt almost like triumph. Elias didn't offer empty words. He simply sat close, hand over hers, letting silence and warmth speak. The locket pressed between them, a tiny island of memory and love in the chaos. The sun climbed higher, light spilling across the canyon, glinting off the swollen water and the wet stones. Clara shivered, but slowly the fire of defiance returned. She had survived betrayal, bullets, and river currents. Elias nudged her gently, rising to his feet. "We keep moving," he said. "They'll come again." Clara nodded, gathering the strength to stand. Water dripped from her hair, clothes clung to her, but she straightened her back. Together, they began trudging along the bank, each step heavy but resolute. Behind them, the river gurgled, carrying away the traces of their struggle, washing the blood, the mud, the pain downstream. But the locket remained, pressed tight against Clara's heart, a symbol of the fragile trust and survival they now shared. The canyon stretched ahead, jagged and unforgiving. The danger wasn't gone. Her family had failed her, Pike had not given up. But Elias and Clara moved together, battered but unbroken, and for the first time, Clara realized she was no longer a victim. She had allies, however fragile. She had a bond forged in fire, river, and blood. And though fear remained, so did hope. And the quiet, stubborn certainty that they would face the world together. The desert stretched endless, bruised by sun and wind. Every step was agony. Every inhalation carried grit and dust. Elias and Clara pressed forward, bodies battered, stomachs hollow, hearts pounding like hooves. Clara's hands, once soft and delicate, now bore cuts, calluses, and grime. She learned quickly, snaring rabbits from the scrub, tending to wounds, digging shallow traps. Survival demanded everything. She clutched the locket at her throat, the silver gleaming faintly in sun and shadow, a talisman against despair. Elias moved beside her, revolver slung low, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. His jaw was tight, hands scarred, every motion purposeful. The desert had claimed many, but he refused to yield. The signs of pursuit were subtle at first. Broken brush, hoofprints trailing too close. Then the horror became undeniable. One dawn, Clara froze. A small patch of earth that had once held rabbits was strewn with carcasses. Smoke curled from the remains of their last camp. The scent of scorched wood and charred flesh clung to the air. "They're sending a message," Elias muttered, voice low, eyes scanning. "Every burned camp, every slaughtered rabbit. They want us afraid." Clara's stomach churned. Fear had stalked her before, but now it mingled with something fiercer, resolve. She squared her shoulders, lifting the locket at her throat as if it could shield her spirit. Days bled into nights, the sun roasting by day, chill clawing at them by night. Each evening they sought refuge where cliffs met canyons, where rocks might hide them, where water pooled shallow. She tended the fire, cooked beans and whatever game they caught, her hands steady now, careful and sure. Yet no sanctuary lasted. One night they crested a ridge to find smoke curling against the black sky. Their latest shelter, stone and wood, was aflame, sending sparks spiraling into the night. Ash and smoke stung their eyes and lungs. Clara gagged, choking. "They'll hunt us till one of us is dead," Elias said, revolver drawn, jaw tight, eyes dark as the firelight danced across his scarred face. Clara swallowed hard. Her throat burned from smoke, but her resolve hardened. "Then let's make sure it's not us," she said, voice firmer than the stones beneath their boots. He looked at her, a flicker of surprise crossing his features, quickly masked by steel. The hunted had become the fighters. Together, they moved as one, shadow to footstep. The desert offered little mercy. Sand gnawed at their heels, mesquite scratched their arms, and thorns tore at clothing. Yet each obstacle Clara overcame reinforced her confidence. She had learned how to track, to hide, to feed, to endure. The locket pressed warm against her chest, a heartbeat of hope in the barren land. At night, under a sickle moon, they lay low in a wash, listening to the distant rattle of hooves and the cough of men far above. Each sound was a warning, each shadow a threat. The world beyond the cliffs had grown hostile, a predator's hunting ground. Still, Clara's spirit no longer trembled at every sound. She tightened her grip on Elias's hand once, fingers brushing over the locket. He acknowledged it with a nod, quiet, no words needed. Trust and determination radiated between them. The next morning, they scouted a narrow canyon path, knowing the terrain could be both shield and trap. Elias led, careful, eyes sharp for movement. Clara moved with him, aware now of every snapping twig, every rustle in the scrub. The air was thick with tension. The scent of burned wood and blood lingered behind them, a constant reminder that Pike's wrath was not idle. Yet together, Elias and Clara moved forward, step by step, silent, resolute, unwilling to be caught again. In the quiet moments between wind and hoofbeat, Clara realized how far she had come. From a girl sold for cattle to a woman who could endure, fight, and survive. And Elias? He had become not just protector, but partner, a mirror of her determination, scarred but unbowed. The rancher's men would come. Their wrath would close fast, like the desert heat pressed to skin. But Clara no longer felt helpless. They would meet fury with fire, threat with steel, and the silver locket at her throat would gleam as both armor and promise. The desert, vast and merciless, had forged them into something dangerous and alive. Dead Man's Ridge rose sharp against the dawn, cliffs jagged like broken teeth. The wind gusted, scattering dust and dry leaves across the rocks. Elias and Clara reached the top, panting, bruised and bloodied. Every muscle screamed. Every breath was hot and metallic. Below, Pike's men gathered like ants, rifles raised, eyes burning with greed and fury. The old rancher himself stood at the center, beard foam-specked, hands twitching with rage. "They think this is over," Elias muttered, rifle raised, jaw tight. Dust clung to his hair and sweat streaked his face. Every line of his body screamed readiness, every scar a story of survival. Clara's hand hovered near her own revolver, trembling slightly, yet she stepped closer. "I'm not hiding," she said, voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Not from him." Elias glanced at her, eyes narrowing. "Stay behind me." "I'm beside you," she insisted. The first volley cracked the morning air. Bullets thudded into stone, sparking dust clouds and sending birds screaming from the cliffs. Men fell, screaming, some rolling down the slope, others firing blindly. The smell of gunpowder stung the air. Elias fired with calm fury, rifle snapping with deadly precision. Each shot dropped a pursuer, each motion measured, despite the wound that bloomed across his shoulder, blood soaking his shirt. Pain gritted his teeth, yet he pressed on, moving, shooting, shielding Clara. Clara's hands shook as the noise and chaos raged around them. Then a rifle barrel slid into view near a boulder, aiming for Elias. Instinct overrode fear. She raised her revolver, fingers stiff, and fired. Smoke curled. The man fell, groaning. Elias's eyes widened in surprise, then met hers. A spark of pride, faint but unmistakable. "Good shot," he muttered, voice tight with pain. The battle roared on. Dust clouds swallowed figures, whistles of bullets sliced the air, and Clara felt the weight of the locket against her chest. The silver glinted in the fire of gunfire, a talisman in the chaos. Then Pike lunged, old feral madness in his eyes. He seized Clara, yanking her into his arms as a shield. "She was bought," he sneered, spittle flying, breath sour with rage. "Mine to command." Clara struggled, heart hammering. Rage boiled over fear. Her fingers fumbled at the locket. With a swift motion, she tore it free and swung it with all her strength. The silver struck Pike squarely in the forehead. He staggered back, momentarily dazed, eyes wide, shock spreading across his face. Elias didn't hesitate. He took aim, every fiber of him focused, and fired. Pike fell backward, crashing against the rocks, dust rising like smoke from a pyre. Silence followed, deafening, ringing across Dead Man's Ridge. Clara's legs wobbled. She sank to one knee, panting, heart pounding. Her hands were sticky with blood, hers and others, but the locket lay in her palm, still shining faintly in the rising sun. Elias limped to her side, shoulder bleeding freely. He crouched, gripping her arm gently. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice rough, almost a whisper against the quiet. Clara shook her head, though the shock still pulsed through her limbs. "No, she faltered, chest heaving. They rose together, bloodied, bruised, sweat and grit mixing on skin and clothing. The ridge stretched around them, cliffs jagged, sky wide, dust settling over the fallen men. Their eyes scanned the horizon. Pike and his men were gone, fallen or scattered. And for the first time in weeks, the world felt still. Clara brushed her fingers across the locket, feeling the dent where she had struck Pike. It had been her weapon, her defiance, her proof that she was no longer merely a pawn. Elias watched her, expression softening despite pain and fatigue. "You did well," he said. "More than most could." Clara looked up at him, seeing the blood, the scars, the weight he carried, yet also the unwavering strength. "We did it," she whispered, voice small but fierce. Together, the ridge bathed in dawn now, gold spilling across rock and stone. Wind swept through, carrying dust, ash, and the faint scent of victory. They stood framed by the rising sun, silhouettes strong and unbroken against the empty canyon. For a moment, the world was quiet, the fight behind them. The locket hung between them, a tiny bridge of memory, loss, and triumph. It was more than silver. It was proof of survival, of courage, of trust, hardened into something enduring. Clara and Elias exchanged a glance. No words were needed. Bloodied, bruised, and exhausted, they had survived the storm of bullets, betrayal, and rage. Dawn painted them warriors, lovers, and survivors alike. And somewhere in the silence the canyon whispered its approval, carrying the tale of two souls who refused to be broken. Framed forever by the jagged ridge and the rising sun, the mountains breathed quiet. Wind swept over sagebrush and stone, carrying scents of pine and sun-baked earth. Clara knelt in the small garden, fingers buried in soil, planting beans and wildflowers. Each seed pressed into the earth felt like a promise, fragile but enduring. Elias hobbled from the cabin, cane in hand, shoulder still stiff from the wound, but eyes steady, full of a calm strength that had been forged in fire and river currents. He paused at the edge of the garden, watching her work, his presence solid, protective, yet gentle. Clara felt the weight of the locket against her chest. The chain mended and strong, silver glinting faintly in the morning sun. She traced it with a finger, the cool metal a reminder of the trials that had shaped them, the auction, the river, the ridge, the bullets, and the betrayal. Some bonds are forged not in blood, she murmured softly. Voice catching, but in fire. Elias stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder, warm and steady. He didn't speak. Words weren't needed. The silence between them was light, comforting, full of understanding and shared endurance. They worked side by side, gathering water, checking the soil, tending sprouts. Clara's hands, once soft and untested, were strong and sure, calluses forming where she had learned to survive. Elias moved slowly, but deliberately, carrying wood and stacking stones for a small porch he had built himself. The cabin, though modest, felt permanent, a refuge carved from the mountainside. Sunlight danced on the locket, catching in its silver folds, echoing every trial it had witnessed. The metal shone like a beacon against her chest, a symbol of survival, courage, and trust. Each glint reminded Clara that she had endured, and that Elias had been more than protector. He had been anchor, mirror, and partner. As the day unfolded, they finally sat together on the cabin's porch. Elias leaned back, shoulder still stiff, face weathered but serene. Clara rested her hand lightly on his, fingertips brushing over the locket. The sun warmed them both, a slow golden bath that seemed to pause time. Around them the mountains stood like sentinels, silent witnesses to battles fought, betrayals survived, and love quietly forged. The ridge behind them rose like a grave and a promise, reminding them of the frontier's cruelty and its beauty, its endings and beginnings entwined. No words were spoken. None were necessary. Love had been tested in fire, bullets, and blood. Now in quiet it was solid, unshakable. Clara exhaled slowly, chest lifting with a sense of freedom she had never known before. The locket glinted one last time in the sun, a tiny silver pulse against her heart. It had survived, as had she. Elias's hand found hers again, fingers curling around hers. And in that touch was every moment they had endured together, every fear, every victory, every shared silence. The camera of this tale would pull back, tracing the cabin, the garden, and the ridge beyond, framing them in the vast sweep of the frontier. Life would continue here, rolling with the wind and sun. But for Clara, for Elias, for the bond they had carved together, freedom had come at last, and in that quiet, unspoken way of the frontier, peace settled over them, not forced, not fleeting, but hard-won and real, like silver shining on a mended chain.